For years, I was overlooked, belittled, and cast aside in my own home, but one explosive confrontation changed everything. Watch how I turned heartbreak and neglect into unstoppable strength, rewriting my story and taking back control of my life. The living room smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust, the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds in jagged lines across the floor, catching the edges of picture frames that seemed to watch me. I froze just inside the doorway, my hand hovering over the chipped doorknob, as laughter floated from the couch, bright, easy, utterly alien. Grace, my younger sister, had that infuriating smile plastered across her face, the kind that always made her victories feel like personal defeats to me. Jack, her husband, leaned back in the armchair like he owned the air around him, grinning at some private joke I wasn't part of. And Mom's expression shone with a warmth that made my chest tighten, the kind of glow reserved for someone who had always been above reproach, someone whose every whim and misstep had been excused, celebrated even. The words hit me before they even left her lips. "Of course, you two can stay here. We'll make room, no problem at all." She wrapped Grace in an embrace so tight it looked like it was made of sunlight and approval, and for a moment I wondered if I was invisible, if my years of effort, the bills I'd paid, the meals I'd cooked, even the nights I stayed awake to keep the house afloat, were nothing but smoke in the wind. My fists clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms, as a cold anger settled over me, smooth and sharp. "Mom, can I talk to you?" My voice was measured, careful, but it felt small against the warmth radiating from the living room. "Not now, Beth," she said, waving me off without even glancing my way. "We need to get the guest room ready." I blinked, swallowing the sting in my throat. "Not now." As if my presence was nothing more than a punctuation mark in their conversation, a reminder of duties fulfilled but not admired. Grace shot me a smug little grin, her eyes sparkling with victory, the way someone looks when they know they've won a battle that wasn't even visible to the other person. "This isn't just your decision," I said, stepping into the room, my voice rising despite my attempt to keep it calm. My pulse pounded like a drum in my ears, echoing every moment I'd been sidelined, overlooked, and dismissed. Mom's face hardened, her warmth turning to steel. "Watch your tone, young lady. Grace is family, and family comes first." I felt a wave of disbelief, the kind that makes you see the world in sudden, sharp edges. "And what about me?" My voice cracked, fragile and brittle under the weight of years of invisible labor. "I've sacrificed everything to keep this house together, and this is how I'm treated?" She stepped closer, finger pointing, eyes blazing. "If you can't accept your sister's situation, maybe you should find somewhere else to live." It was a slap. Not physical, but the kind that echoes in your chest, knocking the air out of you. Grace giggled, covering her mouth, clearly enjoying the spectacle, savoring every tremor of my outrage. I turned and stormed to my room, each step reverberating through the wooden floorboards like a drumbeat of fury. The door slammed behind me, sealing me in a space that had always felt like sanctuary, but now seemed too small, too fragile. I sank to the floor, tears burning my cheeks, a mixture of rage, hurt, and disbelief making my body tremble. For the first time, I admitted it to myself. I could no longer be invisible. I could no longer play the part of the quiet, dutiful daughter. Something inside me had snapped, a spark lighting a fire I didn't yet know would carry me far beyond this house, far beyond their control, into a life where my worth wouldn't be measured by favoritism or smiles stolen from me. And in that moment, amid the suffocating warmth of their misplaced joy, I began to plan my escape, not just from the room, but from a lifetime of being overlooked. The air in the living room was thick, almost tangible, like it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for the inevitable collapse. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting stripes across the worn carpet, highlighting the dust motes that danced lazily in the tense stillness. I froze in the doorway, my hand lingering on the doorknob, stomach tight, as the sound of laughter cut through the room, a light, carefree sound that made my chest ache. Grace, my younger sister, perched on the edge of the sofa like she belonged to some brighter, lighter world, her grin wide, victorious, the kind that always made me feel like I'd been standing in shadow. Jack, her husband, sprawled casually in the armchair, as if the house itself had been waiting for him to take his throne. And Mom. Mom's face was lit with a radiance that made me want to crawl inside it and disappear, a glow reserved for someone eternally adored, someone whose flaws were excused, whose whims were elevated into virtues. "Of course, you two can stay here," she said, wrapping Grace in a hug so tight it looked like it could bend reality. "We'll make room. No problem at all." My throat constricted. My hands clenched, nails biting into my palms as heat and fury crawled up my spine. I had worked for this house, tended it, paid for it, sacrificed countless hours and dreams to keep it standing, and here they were, laughing, glowing, being welcomed as though I were never part of the equation. "Mom, can I talk to you?" I asked, voice steady, though my chest thudded like a drum. She waved me off, eyes still on Grace, brushing me aside as if my presence were a shadow. "Not now, Beth. We need to get the guest room ready." "Not now." As if I were a nuisance in my own life. Grace's smug glance cut through me like a knife, her small victory a fresh burn to my pride. "This isn't just your decision," I said, stepping forward, voice rising, sharp, tempered with pain. Mom turned, expression hardening, the warmth gone, replaced by steel. "Watch your tone, young lady. Grace is family, and family comes first." My chest heaved. "And what about me? I've sacrificed everything for this house, for this family, and this is what I get." She stepped closer, finger pointed, eyes blazing. "If you can't accept your sister's situation, maybe you should find somewhere else to live." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air out of me. Grace giggled behind her hand, eyes sparkling with mischief, soaking in my reaction as if it were a performance she had been waiting to watch for years. I turned on my heel and stormed to my room, suitcase of emotions dragging behind me. Anger, hurt, disbelief, betrayal, a storm that had been building in me for a lifetime finally breaking through. I slammed the door, sank to the floor, and let the tears come, hot and furious, washing my face in shame and rage. And in that suffocating, stifling moment, as the muffled voices of their laughter seeped through the walls, something inside me shifted, a spark of rebellion igniting a fire I hadn't dared to light before. I would not be invisible anymore. I would not be ignored, belittled, or pushed aside. Not here, not by them. Not ever again. Somewhere in the storm of my grief and fury, I realized this was the beginning, the first step toward reclaiming my life, my voice, my dignity. And in that realization, I felt the first flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable, cutting through the suffocating darkness of the room I had once called home. The next morning, the weight of the previous night's storm hadn't lifted. It had only settled into the corners of my room, curling around my chest like a vice. I paced back and forth, letting the quiet hum of the early sun and distant traffic fill the silence that my family had shattered. Every creak of the floorboard felt like an echo of the argument, a reminder of how small I had been made to feel in a house that I had kept together, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, sleepless night by sleepless night. The memory of Grace's smug grin and Mom's dismissive wave churned in my stomach, fueling a bitter cocktail of grief and anger. I could feel my pulse hammering against my temples as my phone vibrated, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready for apologies, for manipulations, or the rehearsed remorse I expected from Grace and Jack. Then came a knock at the door, sharp, deliberate. I froze, the suitcase of my courage tightening at my feet. "Beth?" Jack's voice floated through, deceptively soft, casual, like a feather brushing against the chaos in my mind. My hands trembled slightly as I unlatched the door. "What do you want?" I demanded, the edge in my voice leaving no room for niceties. Jack held up his hands, a gesture of peace, but it only sharpened the storm inside me. "I know this is rough. We really need your help." I laughed, bitter and hollow, the sound echoing off the walls. "Help? You've been nothing but a drain, and now you need me? After everything?" His smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of unease. He tried to step forward, but I stepped back, a protective barrier of indignation keeping him at bay. Look, Beth, we're family. Families support each other. I shook my head, incredulous. Family doesn't kick you out, Jack. Family doesn't make you invisible, worthless, while they parade around favoring everyone else. His mouth opened, then closed. His words stuck in the air like smoke, ineffectual and feeble. I grabbed my packed suitcase, heart hammering, tears of frustration brimming, but unfallen. I'm done enabling your mess, I spat, voice rising with both fury and clarity. I swung the door open and walked past him, each step carrying the weight of years of unacknowledged sacrifice, and yet, somehow, a lightness in finally reclaiming space for myself. Outside, the evening air wrapped around me, cool and liberating, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without choking on resentment. Sarah's apartment was my sanctuary, her familiar warmth a stark contrast to the suffocating hierarchy I had escaped. When I arrived, her arms engulfed me in a hug that felt like permission to finally exhale, to let the storm inside settle into something I could control. I told her everything: Mom's favoritism, Grace's smugness, Jack's manipulative pleas, and she listened, her eyes steady, unwavering, a mirror to the resolve I had been missing in myself. "You're doing the right thing, Beth," she said softly, her words a lifeline. I nodded, letting the truth sink in. I didn't owe them my energy, my patience, or my sacrifices. They had made their choice, and now it was mine to carve out a life unshackled from their judgment, neglect, and favoritism. Over the next few days, I started settling in, unpacking not just my physical belongings, but the fragments of myself I had hidden to survive in that house. With each item placed, each corner reclaimed, I felt a spark of life returning, a curiosity, a freedom, a simmering determination to redefine who I was, beyond the shadow of Mom's favoritism and Grace's entitlement. But even in this fragile sanctuary, the echoes of my family's presence lingered, text messages left unanswered, a voicemail piling up like unspoken threats, and the gnawing question of whether I had done the right thing. The tension between relief and guilt churned inside me, but beneath it all was a deeper, fiercer truth. I had taken the first step toward myself, and nothing, not pleas, not tears, not manipulation, would pull me back into their orbit again. And somewhere in that tension, a quiet thrill stirred, a promise that the tables were only beginning to turn, and that this story, my story, was far from over. Days bled into nights as I settled into Sarah's apartment, the walls no longer pressing down on me, but instead echoing with quiet possibility. Yet freedom was never purely liberating. It demanded confrontation with the shadows of the past. I was unpacking the last of my boxes, running my fingers over books and trinkets that had been buried beneath years of silent labor in a home that never felt like mine, when my phone buzzed violently against the wooden table. A torrent of calls and messages from Mom and Grace lighting up the screen. Normally, I would have silenced it without a thought, but something inside me, equal parts exhaustion and defiance, urged me to answer. Mom's voice trembled, brittle and raw. "Beth, we're in trouble. We need you." A laugh escaped me, dark and sharp, tasting of years of resentment, but even in that laughter, a strange clarity began to emerge. For the first time, I saw the situation for what it was. They were not pleading because they had learned empathy. They were cornered, facing the consequences of the choices they had made, the bills they had ignored, the debts they had hidden. And now the very stability they had taken for granted was unraveling. It was poetic, yes, but also a test, my test. Could I allow myself to feel satisfaction, or would I let old habits of guilt and obligation drag me back into servitude? My thumb hovered over the screen as I listened to Mom's desperate explanation of late payments, utility cutoffs, and Jack's hidden debts, and I realized something profound. I had reached a point where their crisis no longer demanded my submission. For the first time, I wasn't a caretaker, a mediator, a shadow in my own life. I was a spectator, and their reckoning was unfolding on my terms. But the pull of compassion gnawed at me, a whisper that perhaps a part of me still ached for the family I had wished I had, the family that never truly existed. I could almost see the scene from outside, the overgrown lawn, the past due notices scattered across counters, Grace sobbing in the corner, while Jack tried to mask panic with empty reassurances, their world crumbling in the exact house where I had once kept order. A house I had maintained with my blood and sweat, now a stage for justice and reckoning. In that moment, an electric surge of empowerment coursed through me, mingled with a bittersweet twist of sorrow. I had survived. I had escaped, and yet I was witnessing the fragility of the life I had left behind. I made a decision, sudden and resolute, to step fully into my own life, to let the consequences fall squarely on them, but also to document, to observe, to learn how to wield my independence with precision rather than chaos. That night, I began drafting plans for a new chapter: financial independence, professional growth, self-care rituals, and clear boundaries with the people who had never respected me. I pored over spreadsheets, contacted clients, and organized my apartment into a command center of reclamation, each action a declaration that I would no longer be invisible, no longer second in line, no longer expendable. And yet, as I locked my bedroom door and sank into the quiet hum of my reclaimed sanctuary, I felt the duality of triumph and torment, the intoxicating power of watching those who once overshadowed me falter, and the piercing reminder of how long I had endured their favoritism and neglect. In that tension, a pivotal truth crystallized. The past had shaped me, but it would not define me, and the turning point of my life had arrived, not with forgiveness, not with vengeance, but with the stark, cinematic realization that I was finally writing the rules, steering my own story, and from this night onward, nothing would be the same. Weeks passed in a haze of late-night planning and early-morning reflection, my life slowly recalibrating around boundaries I had finally drawn, yet the quiet I had carved for myself was not immune to the past clawing back. One evening, as I sifted through emails and notes for a work presentation, the insistent buzz of my phone erupted again, this time Grace herself, her voice trembling and fractured. A mirror of desperation I had once known all too well. "Beth, please, you have to help us. We're losing everything. Mom can't keep up. Jack's debts are crushing us." I let the words hang in the air, tasting the bitter irony, and for the first time I felt the full weight of choice pressing down on me. Intervene and risk eroding the hard-won autonomy I had fought for, or remain steadfast in letting them face the consequences of their neglect. My chest tightened as memories surged: Mom's dismissive glances, Grace's smug smiles, the invisible lines I had been forced to live behind, and a storm of conflicting emotions churned within me. Empathy battled rage, guilt battled liberation. The kind of moral and emotional tug-of-war that had defined my life for far too long. I remembered Sarah's gentle voice the night I first moved in, cautioning me not to let resentment poison my heart, and yet, seeing Grace's trembling frame on the phone made my resolve waver, igniting a tension so visceral it felt almost cinematic in its intensity, like the world had slowed around me to focus on this pivotal choice. My mind replayed every sacrifice, every ignored plea for acknowledgement, every time I had been the invisible engine keeping a household afloat while their whims took precedence, and now here they were, begging, vulnerable, exposing the chaos that my absence had revealed, a chaos I could have fixed in seconds, yet fixing it would mean submitting once again to the same patterns I had fought so hard to escape. I paced, gripping my phone, the room echoing with the sound of my own heartbeat, and I realized that this was more than a family crisis. It was a reckoning, a test of who I had become. I considered dialing Mom back immediately, offering guidance, maybe even lending financial or emotional support, but a flicker of steel hardened inside me. No, this time, the lesson must be theirs to learn. Still, I didn't speak. I listened, every sob, every quiver in Grace's voice, every whispered plea, registering with both agony and a strange sense of satisfaction. Then came Jack's interjection, defensive, trying to redirect blame. "Beth, it's not just us. Mom knew about the debts. She should have helped." And in that instant, I understood fully how their world had crumbled around entitlement and denial, and how my stepping away had illuminated the truth they had been blind to, that consequences were real, and comfort was not a right, it was earned. I placed the phone on the table, staring into the dim lamplight as my reflection blurred into the shadows, And I realized the stakes were no longer just theirs, they were mine too, because this choice would define the trajectory of my life. Compassion at the expense of freedom, or liberation through steadfast boundaries. I felt my throat tighten, my palms slick, and for a heartbeat, I questioned if I could really endure the guilt, the silent prayers, the imagined faces of them suffering without me. But then I saw Sarah's encouraging smile in my mind, her voice whispering that strength was forged in moments like this, and my hand rose, firm and unwavering, lifting the phone again. "Grace," I said slowly, each word deliberate, "I hear you. But you need to face what you've created. I won't be the one to fix it this time." Silence hung thick for a moment, broken only by her soft whimper, and in that silence I felt the bittersweet rush of empowerment and heartache collide, the tension of justice and mercy entwined. In that charged stillness, I realized that the emotional climax was not a single act of confrontation, but this raw, cinematic confrontation with choice itself, the space where my past, my pain, and my newfound autonomy converged, preparing me to stand fully in my power, knowing that the next move would be irreversible. The front door slammed behind me, and I stood in the silence of the empty living room, heart pounding like a war drum, suitcase at my side, as Mom, Grace, and Jack froze mid-step, their faces pale with disbelief. For years I had been the invisible anchor, the unpaid caretaker of their comforts, and now, finally, I spoke, my voice steady but edged with fire. "I am done bending, done sacrificing, done being the invisible safety net for your recklessness. You've had comfort while I carried the weight of this family, and now you face your own chaos." Grace's lips quivered, Jack's jaw tightened, Mom's eyes shimmered with guilt and shock, but I didn't waver. Every ounce of hurt, every overlooked sacrifice, every silent resentment erupted into this moment of truth. A cinematic release that shook the air around us. I set my suitcase down deliberately, a symbol of permanence, and took a slow step back. "I will no longer be part of your story. I choose myself." And as I turned toward the door, the sunlight spilling across the floor, I felt the invisible chains of years of neglect snap, leaving only clarity, strength, and the fierce, intoxicating taste of freedom, raw, unyielding, and irrevocable. Weeks passed, and the echoes of that confrontation faded into a new rhythm of life, one I chose for myself, unshackled from the weight of favoritism and neglect. The apartment with Sarah became a sanctuary, walls filled with laughter, soft music, and the comforting scent of fresh coffee in the mornings, a stark contrast to the cold tension I had left behind. I found joy in the small things, mornings spent reading on the balcony as sunlight pooled across the floor, evenings lost in the messy, grounding process of shaping clay at a local pottery class, and nights where my mind was finally free from worry over debts or grudges that were never mine to bear. Work became not a source of obligation, but a stage to prove my own worth, my ideas celebrated, my voice heard, and my confidence blooming like spring after a long, harsh winter. Occasionally, I caught whispers of my family's struggles, a past I no longer carried on my shoulders, and a part of me felt a distant sting, reminder of the years I had endured. Yet, that sting was tempered by the fire of my own emergence, a truth I had earned through courage and choice. I was no longer invisible. Standing on the balcony one evening, the sky painted with streaks of crimson and gold, I felt the full weight of liberation settle in my chest. The hurt, the anger, the bitterness, all transformed into a quiet, unshakable strength. And in that hush I whispered to the wind, to the life I was reclaiming, "I am here. I am enough. And I am finally free." The past would remain, etched in memory, but it no longer dictated my future. I stepped inside, closing the door on old shadows, and opened my heart fully to the life I had fought to create, one built on my terms, radiant, fearless, and undeniably mine. If you felt inspired by this story of resilience and empowerment, hit like and subscribe for more real-life emotional journeys that will move and motivate you.